From family dreams to nightmares, my father's fall after my uncle's deceit. I am Mary, a sophomore in college, and my life today feels like a shadow of what it once was. Just a few years ago, my family embodied the warmth and joy that I believed would always define us. My father, a robust man with an infectious laugh, was the kind of dad who would spend hours in the garden teaching me and my younger brother, Alex, the names of all the flowers and how to take care of them. My mother, a gentle soul with eyes that seemed to hold kindness, made our small, cozy house a home with her loving touch and the heavenly smell of her cooking. Back then, the future seemed bright. Our little family was tight-knit, bound by love and shared dreams, especially after my parents managed to buy a hectare of land from my uncle, my mother's brother. That land was more than just soil and greenery. It represented a legacy, a future where our family could build and grow, both literally and metaphorically. We envisioned a small family farm, maybe a few rental cottages, that could nestle in the shade of the large oak trees dotting the landscape. It was a symbol of stability and hope, a tangible piece of prosperity that promised to anchor our family for generations. My Uncle James, my mother's younger brother, had always been a charismatic and persuasive figure. Growing up, I saw him as a fun-loving uncle who seemed to breeze through life, always with a ready joke or a small gift for me and Alex. He was a frequent visitor in our home, his arrival often heralding impromptu barbecues and late-night storytelling sessions. My mother adored him. She often spoke of their childhood adventures with a fondness and nostalgia that painted my uncle as not just a sibling, but a hero in her eyes. This deep familial bond made him more than just an uncle to us. He was an integral part of our family fabric. My parents, especially my mother, trusted him implicitly. This trust was rooted in decades of shared history and mutual support. When Uncle James spoke, his words carried the weight of sincerity, or so we believed. In hindsight, the signs of his financial instability were there, but they were subtle, overshadowed by his charm and our trust. He mentioned struggles now and then, hints about the economy, bad investments, the rising costs of living, but they were always presented as temporary setbacks, nothing a good next move couldn't fix. So when Uncle James offered to sell a hectare of his land to my parents in 2013, it seemed like a golden opportunity. The land was located on the outskirts of our town, a lush expanse of green that bordered a small forest. My parents had always dreamed of owning more land, perhaps starting a small organic farm or building a few holiday cottages to rent out. The land my uncle offered seemed perfect for such dreams. The deal was straightforward, or so it seemed. Uncle James explained that he was selling the land because he needed liquidity to fund my cousin's college education. He painted a vivid picture. The land, once developed, could be the foundation of our family's financial security. My parents, eager to invest in our future and to help my uncle, agreed to buy it. The price was reasonable, the terms favorable, and the paperwork appeared to be in order, except for one detail. The Red Book, the official document proving land ownership, was still under the bank's hold due to a small loan my uncle had taken out. With reassurances from Uncle James that the loan would be cleared within a year, my parents proceeded. He crafted a promissory note, a casual yet seemingly earnest document wherein he vowed to clear the debt and transfer the Red Book to my parents as soon as possible. Trusting him, they paid him the money, believing that the formalities were just that, a formality. Months turned into a year, and the promised Red Book did not materialize. My parents grew anxious, but inquiries were met with reassurances and new promises from Uncle James. He always had a reason for the delay: paperwork snafus, bank errors, bureaucratic red tape. But his charm and our family's trust in him kept my parents from pressing too hard. This pattern continued until late 2018. That was when everything changed. The financial bubble that Uncle James had been inflating burst with shocking consequences. It turned out that the initial loan against the land was just the tip of an iceberg. Uncle James had been drowning in debt, far more than he had disclosed. In a desperate move, he had taken out further loans against the land, each one a deeper cut into the trust my parents had placed in him. The final blow came abruptly. Uncle James declared bankruptcy, and within weeks, we learned that he had fled the country. The news was delivered by a bank representative who arrived one crisp autumn morning to place foreclosure signs around the hectare that we thought was ours. The bank explained that the land was heavily mortgaged, far beyond its worth, and would be seized to cover my uncle's debts. The revelation shattered my parents. The betrayal by someone they had trusted so deeply was a wound that went beyond financial loss. My father, particularly, felt deceived and humiliated. He had advocated for the deal, swayed by my mother's trust in her brother, and by the dreams they had harbored for that piece of land. The loss was not just a plot of earth. It was a future they had envisioned and promised to us. As the legal reality settled in, so did the bitterness. My father's sense of betrayal morphed into a festering anger that found its easiest outlet in my mother, who, despite being a victim herself, bore the brunt of his accusations and grief. The man who had once been the life of our family gatherings was now a source of tension and despair. In this new, harsh light, every memory of Uncle James was recast. The laughter and gifts, once signs of his generosity, now seemed part of a facade that hid his deceit. His stories, once enchanting, now felt like manipulations. The trust that had once bound our family to him had turned into a chain that dragged us down into an abyss of betrayal and regret. The descent into despair was gradual at first, like the slow setting of the sun before darkness fully takes hold. My father, once a pillar of strength and joy in our household, succumbed to the weight of his disillusionment. His days began and ended with the bitter tang of alcohol, the bottles accumulating like silent markers of his decline. He no longer tended to his business, a small landscaping company that had flourished due to his love for nature and his dedication to his craft. Instead, he let calls go unanswered, projects unfinished, and slowly, the vibrant man who had raised me with laughter and lessons in resilience succumbed to a listless apathy. It was not just the loss of the land that broke him, but the betrayal by his own brother-in-law and the crushing responsibility of having convinced my mother to trust her brother. In his eyes, his failure was twofold. Not only had he failed to protect our financial future, but he had also placed his faith in a man who destroyed us. This sense of failure consumed him, leading him to relinquish all his hard work as if in surrender to an unseen foe. He wandered through his days like a ghost, his presence marked more by the trail of empty bottles than by any interaction with us. My mother bore the brunt of this transformation. The sharp edge of my father's tongue turned against her in his darkest moments. He accused her of complicity, of knowing her brother's intentions, and yet leading us into ruin. His words were like daggers, slicing through the fabric of her self-worth. "Your family is a bunch of scammers!" he would shout, the alcohol fueling his anger, turning it into a wildfire that consumed any remnants of peace within our home. Despite the onslaught, my mother's resilience was something to behold. She absorbed the blows with a kind of stoic grace, her eyes often wet with unshed tears, but her posture remained unbroken. She became the buffer between my father's wrath and the rest of us, especially for Alex, my younger brother, who was just entering his teenage years. Amidst our family's crisis, Alex's rebellion against the situation was fierce and protective. He could not bear to see our mother demeaned and insulted. His confrontations with our father began as verbal skirmishes, challenging the unfairness of his accusations, defending our mother's honor with a boldness that both scared and awed me. "Stop blaming Mom, she didn't do anything wrong," he would yell back, his young voice cracking under the strain of his emotions. These clashes often escalated until the house felt like a battlefield, the air so thick with tension it was hard to breathe. Witnessing these exchanges tore at me. I was caught in a relentless storm of emotions, anger at my uncle for his deceit, despair over my father's downfall, and a deep, gnawing pain for my mother's suffering. Each evening, As I heard my father's slurred accusations and my brother's desperate defenses, I felt a part of my heart crumble. The helplessness was overwhelming. I was a spectator in my own life, watching the people I loved tear each other apart. My mother, amidst this chaos, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She went about her daily routines, cooking meals that none of us had the heart to eat, cleaning a house that no longer felt like a home, and trying, always trying, to mediate between my father and brother. Her efforts were Herculean, and yet I could see the toll it took on her. The circles under her eyes grew darker each day, her smiles more forced and fleeting. She often pulled me aside, her hands clutching mine with a desperation that was hidden from the others. "Take care of your studies, Mary." "Don't worry about us," she would whisper, her voice trembling. But how could I not worry? How could I focus on college applications and exams when home was a place of war? The weight of her suffering became my constant companion. I lay awake at night, listening to the echoes of their arguments, and wondered how much more we could withstand. The fear of the phone ringing with news of something worse kept me on edge, a perpetual anxiety that gnawed at my concentration, my peace. In those moments when the house finally quieted down, I would find my mother in the living room, staring out the window. Sometimes I joined her, sitting in silence as we both lost ourselves in the world outside. It was during one of these silent vigils that she finally broke down and shared her deepest fears. "I'm scared, Mary," she confessed, her voice a whisper. "Scared that he'll never forgive me, scared of losing you and Alex to this hatred." Her admission shattered the last barriers I had put up to protect myself. I realized then that my role wasn't just to be a bystander. I needed to be her ally, Alex's support, and perhaps find a way to reach my father. But the path to healing seemed obscured by the thick fog of past mistakes and present pain. Life at home had become a landscape of suspicion and bitterness. My father's distrust had deepened to a point where even the simplest acts of familial kindness were scrutinized and tainted with accusations. My mother's occasional visits to her mother's house, or her attempts to maintain some semblance of connection with her parents through gifts or phone calls, were not spared from my father's critical eye. He saw these gestures not as acts of love, but as betrayals, further proof of conspiracies woven in his mind. One chilly afternoon, I returned from school to find the house unusually cold and quiet. My mother sat at the kitchen table, her face weary and lined with fresh worries. She looked up as I entered, managing a weak smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had been to visit Grandma, who was unwell, and had brought her some homemade soup and a warm blanket. When my father learned of this, he exploded in rage, accusing her of wasting our scarce resources on her family, whom he now viewed almost as enemies. "It doesn't matter what I do. It's always wrong in his eyes," she confided in me, her voice breaking. "But I can't just stop caring for my mom, Mary. I can't." The situation with the phone calls was even worse. Every ring stirred a palpable tension in the air. My father, often fueled by his drunken stupor, would accuse my mother of conspiring with her brother, my uncle. Despite my uncle having disappeared years ago, he couldn't seem to grasp that no one in the family had heard from him since he fled, leaving us to deal with the fallout of his actions. Each call, no matter the caller, seemed to him a ghostly echo of past betrayals, a reminder of the trust that had been broken and the financial security that had been stolen from us. Despite these overwhelming pressures, my mother continued to shoulder the responsibility of not just trying to keep our family together, but also ensuring that my two sisters and I could continue our education. My sisters, both younger than me, were in high school, facing their own battles with the ripple effects of our family's crisis. The cost of education was a constant worry, but my mother was determined that the chaos at home would not derail our futures. Seeing her struggle, I made the decision to take on a part-time job alongside my studies. I was now a freshman at a local community college, having chosen a school close to home to reduce expenses and stay near my family. My days were a blend of classes, studying, and working late shifts at a nearby cafe. Every paycheck I received went partly to help out at home and partly to cover my own educational expenses. This dual role of student and financial contributor was exhausting. There were nights I came home so tired that I could barely make it through dinner before falling asleep over my textbooks. Yet seeing my mother's quiet gratitude and the way she fought to keep us all moving forward gave me the strength to keep going. She managed our meager finances with a precision and care that was nothing short of heroic, stretching every dollar to cover not just school fees, but the basic necessities of life. Her resilience was our family's unsung melody, a quiet background score that pushed us all to persevere. My mother never complained about her lot, accepting each day's troubles with a resolve that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Her love for us was an unspoken promise, a commitment that she lived out by enduring the harsh words and the colder silences from my father. My younger sisters, witnessing all this, grew in their own resilience. We became a team, albeit a silent one, finding comfort in shared glances and quiet conversations away from the storms that frequently brewed in our living room. We helped each other with homework, shared responsibilities around the house, and saved little surprises for our mother, like the time we all chipped in to buy her a new book by her favorite author, hiding it under her pillow to find after a particularly hard day. In these moments, we found our pockets of peace, small oases of normalcy in a desert of chaos. My father's outbursts and suspicions became the storms we learned to weather, building stronger shelters in our bonds with each other. Each challenge, while painful, forged us into more than just siblings and a mother. It made us allies in a struggle that none of us had chosen, but all of us were determined to survive. As I lay in bed each night, listening to the faint sounds of the house settling, I thought about my mother's sacrifices and my father's pain. The journey was far from easy, and many days the burden of what we were enduring seemed too much to bear. But in the strength of my mother's unwavering love and the shared resolve of my sisters, I found a flicker of hope that perhaps someday we might find a way through the darkness, back to a place where love and trust could bloom once more in our family garden. The story continues as per your request, rewritten with proper punctuation and clarity for ease of reading.